Okay, so now we're going to go into Module 3 and the cognitive behavioral paradigm here in Causes of Abnormal Behavior of Chapter 2. And so what we're going to do really is focus quite a bit on the behavioral side of the cognitive behavioral paradigm. And then we'll hit very briefly on the cognitive aspect. So let's go ahead and look at different cognitive behavioral paradigms. So all behavior, both abnormal and normal, is a product of learning. You're learning right now, staring at a screen, listening to me, hopefully. And there are different types of learning, and we'll be going over each type in this particular module. Once again, fairly quickly, and these can be pretty complex concepts to fully get down, so don't worry if you don't pick it up right away. You have classical condition, and Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist, is the person who really found that and codified it. Operant conditioning with B.F. Skinner. These are the reinforcers and punishers that a lot of people are going to be familiar with. And then you have observational learning with Albert Bandura. So let's go ahead and look at that. First, we're going to start off with classical conditioning. And that stern man is the Russian physiologist, Ivan Pavlov. So if you ever heard of Pavlovian responses, that's who it's named after. And what we see is that classical conditioning is association learning. And what you do is you pair an unconditioned stimulus to a neutral stimulus to create a conditioned response. Now, all of this is using highfalutin language, but let me explain how it was originally discovered and how the concept works. So Pavlov was doing work on dogs and trying to figure out their salivary response. In other words, why do they drool with certain things? And found that meat, as soon as you put meat around dogs, they already begin to drool, and it's to help them to be able to digest all of that meat and break it down when they're chewing on it. And so what he noticed, though, is that when they flipped on the light in the lab, prior to feeding the dogs, that they would begin to salivate in anticipation. But why would they be salivating if they hadn't seen the meat yet? Well, the key was it was the light. But the light, if you shine a light or turn on a light for an ordinary dog that wasn't in this situation, they wouldn't begin to salivate. So he began to put together what was called classical conditioning. So the unconditioned stimulus, the built-in unlearned stimulus, is salivating. And the unconditioned response, is the meat powder, okay? So as soon as you get exposed to the meat powder, you're going to go ahead, if you're a dog, to start to salivate. The salivation is the unconditioned response. So unconditioned stimulus in this case is the meat powder. Unconditioned response, salivating. You don't have to teach dogs to salivate when they see meat powder. Now, what you do have to teach them to do is to be able to, when you pair a neutral thing, like a bell or a light, to an unconditioned stimulus, and you get the unconditioned response, that is then what we call conditioned. In other words, when we link the meat powder and it becomes associated with the light being turned on, now that unconditioned stimulus has been transferred to a conditioned stimulus that used to be neutral. And then that gets linked into salivating. So you'll notice I said that the response for the unconditioned response is salivating, and it's also the conditioned response is salivating. But the way you differentiate which is what is it salivating to? If it's salivating to meat powder, in this case, it's going to be unconditioned because there was no training involved. If it's going to be the salivating is linked to the light turning on, now it is a conditioned response. Something in the back of my mind thinks I just confused you quite a bit. I want you to just be aware that something neutral gets linked to something that's already apparent, and that it results in the same type of responses, but what elicits that response is different. Okay? Don't get caught up in this nomenclature so much. Now, eventually, if you especially look into a learning class, you're going to need to know this. So this isn't wasted effort for all you psych majors. You'll run across this stuff again and again. So it wouldn't be bad to kind of get that in your long-term memory. But that's more cognitive. Okay, so what we do eventually is extinction. And extinction is if we kept flipping on the light in the dog's lab, but we never gave them any meat powder. Okay. And after a while, the dogs, light comes on, they begin to salivate, no meat. Light comes on, they begin to salivate, no meat. If that happens frequently enough, we have severed that connection between the unconditioned stimulus and the conditioned stimulus. So when you sever it, that's what we call extinction. Now, for a long time, everybody loved Pavlov's finding and they said, oh, congratulations, Ivan, you've done so well. But it's a good thing that humans can't be trained like stupid dogs like this. Well, the joke's on us because we are no better. And the man that proved that was John Watson. And he showed that through the little Albert experiment. In this case, what he did is showed, it must be about, you can see little Albert there in the picture, not too old, probably not more than maybe 6 months old. And what they would do is put a little white rat. You can tell this was back in the early 1900s. I mean, there were so many other things they could have paired. Why a white rat? I guess there were some over in the experimental lab. And so they're like, oh, yeah, can I borrow a couple of rats? But babies aren't naturally afraid of white rats. But what they would do is they would get up behind little Albert, and every time he would reach for the white rat, they would make a very loud noise behind him, startling him. So the loud noise and the startle response, the loud noise is an unconditioned stimulus, and the crying or startle response and crying, that is an unconditioned response. But when they paired it with the white rat, now every time little Albert saw a white rat, he became afraid. That is now a conditioned stimulus. The white rat is now a conditioned response of the fear. And we probably have any of these experiences ourselves where we've inadvertently done classical conditioning to us. I am going to bet if anybody has imbibed alcohol of some sort, that you probably have at least one type of alcoholic drink that you are absolutely never going to touch for the rest of your life. And odds are that you did classical conditioning associating with a particular style of alcohol with alcohol poisoning, which really has nothing to do with how it's presented, whether it's in a screwdriver or it's beer or wine or whatever it is. The alcohol is what made you sick. It wasn't a particular type of alcohol, other than you did way too much of it. And so that the only way that if you want to make sure that you, say, open your palate to various alcoholic drinks is to continue to try to drink the one that made you sick. And after enough times of it not making you sick, then you will have overcome that. Most people don't want to go through that whole process, though. There's a lot of different alcoholic drinks out there. You can't tell that I'm recording this at the end of the day, I imagine. All right, so that's classical conditioning. Let's go ahead and go into operant conditioning. So operant conditioning, there's B.F. Skinner up there in the left, and he is the one, if you've ever heard about reinforcers and punishers, he's the one that really kind of hit it out of the park in regards to that. So what he said is behavior is a function of its consequences. So behavior increases if the behavior has been reinforced or rewarded, and behavior decreases if the behavior has been punished. Okay, so reinforcement increases the probability. This is like when you have pleasant experiences. So, like, when people smile at you, if you open the door for them, means that you're more likely to open the door for them again. Punishment is some sort of unpleasant thing, that aversive. The classic one is spanking. The idea is if you did a behavior and then you got spanked right afterwards, you're less likely to do that behavior again. Now, I'm not going to debate on corporal punishment, but you can see what the example is here. So there are different types of reinforcers and punishers. You have positive reinforcement. Now, when I say positive and negative in these contexts, all I'm meaning is I'm adding something or I'm taking away something. So positive reinforcement, I am adding something to increase a behavior. So if I was smiling at you when you did something good and you did it again, that's positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, I'm taking away something to increase a behavior. So if I go ahead and nag at you to complete some task, like you need to go take out the garbage, take out the garbage, take out the garbage, and I'm getting so annoying, you finally take out the garbage, and guess what? I stop. I've taken away something. And then the next time you have to take out the garbage, you're going to go, they're just going to keep on doing it and keep on doing it until I do. I'm just going to do it now. See, I've increased the behavior. Now, it works the opposite way here with positive punishment. I am adding something like my hand to your backside, and that is going to decrease the behavior. Or there's negative punishment where I am removing something to go ahead and decrease the behavior. So confiscating, say, your favorite gaming platform, I am removing something from you so that you are less likely to do that behavior again. Okay, that is like a blitz through. If you've ever heard applied behavior analysis, that's where we do work a lot with children that have autism spectrum disorder or other developmental disabilities. They a lot of times use this, but it can apply to everybody. It's all based on operant conditioning. So I got to tell you, if you know operant conditioning well, your world is going to be so much better along the way. But that's as much as in this class that we're going to get into it. Now, next, we're going to look at Albert Bandura, who's up in the left-hand corner here. And he is the one that really made observational learning well known. And he did that through a very famous experiment called the Bobo doll studies. And basically, there is a Bobo doll there. It's one of those inflatables with sand at the bottom. And you used to be able to punch it and it would come back up. And so what he did is he watched adults who were being very violent with the Bobo doll, and the boys would or girls would watch the film, or they would be very nice to the Bobo doll. And then what they would do is after they'd watched the film, they would open the door and, oh my goodness, there's a Bobo doll. And then they would be filming the kids on how they interacted with the Bobo doll. What they found is that kids that saw the more violent interactions were more violent themselves, and hence launched 100,000 different undergraduate studies on the various consequences of media or toys' influence on children becoming more or less violent in their interactions. And you've probably heard about these. Either it's video games causing it, violent TV causing it, music with violent lyrics causing it, and it's all based on these kind of Bobo doll studies and what we call vicarious kind of learning, or in other words, modeling behavior that you've seen but you haven't actually done that yourself. Okay, so the three main types of behavioral learning that we are talking about: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Now, that's the behavioral aspect of cognitive behavioral. And what we want to see next is the cognition. And we're really not going to talk a lot about cognition, but the idea is that we have certain attributions. These kind of perceived causes are people's beliefs about cause and effect relations. And when we have these kind of attributions, they can become distorted in some way, and that can influence then your behavior, which can cause abnormal behavior. So here's an example. Aaron Beck, who's very famous for doing anxiety and depression work, really looked at this. And so what Beck said is we have these automatic distorted perceptions of reality, and they cause people to become depressed. So here's a thought. I can't rely on my partner. When my partner's away, tries to help, I turn away from them because I can't really rely on them. That's the behavior. And then I feel unsupported, angry, and lonely. And that keeps in a cyclical process. Well, I keep thinking I can't rely on my partner, which influences my behavior negatively, which isolates me, which makes me feel more like I can't rely on the partner. And you can see where this downward spiral starts to head. And it's all in our heads. Depression, anxiety are really big on these types of attributions, but we also see it with oppositional behavior too. Okay, so that's the cognition. So cognitive behavioral paradigm says that we have environmental forces or our own thoughts in our head that are having an impact on our overall behavior, and some of that can create abnormal behavior. All right, so we're almost done with the various paradigms that we initially talked about. So in Module 4, what we're going to do is look at the humanistic paradigm and then also the systems theory that tries to bring a lot of these paradigms together all in one to explain the causes of abnormal behavior. So go ahead and stay tuned for Module 4.